Brace, brace, brace. If you were on a commercial airliner and that plane was about to go down, that is the warning that you would hear from the cockpit. Brace, 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 in order to get ready for the impact. We just had an election in the United States, and it's proved to be an extremely controversial election with people protesting all over the United States. And I said in advance of the election that I needed some good alcohol for election night. If you thought I was kidding, I wasn't kidding at all. I did get some alcohol and drink a bit that night. I didn't go overboard because I've learned some hard lessons over the years about drinking too much. But I did drink some because I did want to take the edge off, and I was a little bit nervous about what was going to happen. But since the election of Mr. Trump as President of the United States, I've heard about all kinds of extreme reactions from people who were not expecting that result. There have been protests in about 30 cities over the United States, and people just raising all kinds of hell because they're extremely unhappy, and they can't believe this happened. Some of the reactions to Mr. Trump's election that I've heard about are people immediately falling into serious depression. They're so depressed they don't know what to do. People exploding in anger, vomiting, fainting, all kinds of extreme reaction because they're just so shocked about what's happened. Well, I understand those feelings. I know what all that stuff feels like because I'm only human, and you are too. If you don't know it, you will find out that you're only human in one way or another sooner or later. So I understand these physical reactions to this, what has been for many people an extreme shock. Now, I'm familiar with those things. There are a couple of things I'm not familiar with. There are students in some colleges who have been too upset to take their examinations, and apparently they're being excused. And in my college days, and it wasn't as long ago as it might seem, but in my college days, when time for final exams came around, you took your exam or you took a 0 on the exam without an extremely good excuse. I took some final exams after a massive tornado outbreak one time, which had a tremendous psychological impact on everybody in the area. And yet I still took the exams and ended up getting very good grades. And even beyond that, I've heard of some people calling suicide prevention hotlines, and people are just so shocked. People could not believe this was going to happen. And what I don't understand is, why didn't they believe that it could happen? Why was this so impossible that once the result came in, people couldn't understand that it happened because they believed so fervently that it was going to go the other way that they never even considered the possibility that Mr. Trump was going to win. And the only answer, I guess, that I can come up with is they haven't seen a lot of the America that I have seen, because in the last number of years, and it's been going on for quite a while now, it didn't stop during the Great Recession. It got pretty bad during the Great Recession, but it didn't stop then, is that the white working class has kind of gotten pummeled. And what do I mean by white working class? Well, working class and middle class is not the same thing. On the economic ladder, working class is a little bit below middle class. People generally work by the hour. Sometimes they go to work early in the morning. Sometimes they work odd hours. A lot of times they work in factories. They also work in hotels and restaurants. They drive buses. They work in carpentry sometimes. They are plumbers. And I'm not referring to owners of businesses, but people who work for other people as plumbers and carpenters and welders and tradesmen of various kinds. So the working class, that's like a step below the middle class. And the middle class tends to be more professional type people. Your doctors and your lawyers and similar people. But the working class consists of hourly workers and to a big extent, lower paid salary workers. And I've read a lot of information in the last few years about how the white working class has been absolutely pummeled. especially the male white working class, where a lot of the hard hat jobs went away during the Great Recession, and they just never came back in very large numbers. And the Democratic Party, President Obama and the Democratic Party, did do some very admirable things to try to help the working class. What they did was they've always espoused raising the minimum wage, so that's a Democratic policy that helps a lot of people. And there was the effort with health care reform, Obamacare, which made it possible for some people to get insurance, although the way it worked out, a lot of people ended up not being eligible, and a lot of other people, even though they were eligible for Obamacare, they didn't get a very good deal. They ended up paying much more of their income than they thought they were going to pay. And then there was the infrastructure spending that came from the stimulus, and these were all very admirable efforts. But in spite of those efforts, the white working class in particular, it's been more notable. It's happened to the working class in general, but it's been much more noticeable among the white working class. They have struggled financially. Yes, Democrats have supported raising minimum wage, and that's happened in a lot of states, and Democrats did support health care reform, but when it comes to the working class, it seems like people have been treated almost like pariahs or lepers or something. People who lose manufacturing jobs due to trade agreements and similar changes in the global economy, well, they're kind of told we're in this age of globalization now, and you'll just have to adjust. And if you want to get a good job, you'll have to go get that bachelor's degree, that 4-year degree, and that's out of reach for a lot of people because of the cost. Student financial aid notwithstanding, the student financial aid that is available to a lot of people simply won't cover the cost of an education and also living expenses anymore. And the cost of higher education is so ridiculously bad, and we're in such a huge student loan crisis now with people who can't pay back their student loan, that bachelor's degree is out of reach for most Americans unless they want to get in a huge student loan mess. And so what we have is a whole huge segment of the population in the United States that is struggling to make a living, struggling to pay their bills. They can't seem to earn enough money to live in a decent fashion. It's not just a matter of health insurance, it's not just a matter of whether the minimum wage goes up, but they are actually struggling to make a living. And you know, you might ask, why don't some of these people work harder to move up in their jobs? Well, I'll tell you this much about that. Earlier in my working life, I worked in the retail business for 5.5 years, and it was a name that you would know. Everybody knows it. I'm not going to say it here, but there's probably one in your town. Horrible company. They just treated people terribly, and I promised myself after leaving there that I would never ever work for that company again. And yet when I worked there, people told me they want go-getters. You know, you can move up there, you can move into management there. When are you going to move into management? And my response to that was, I'm never going to do that, because I cannot treat people that way. I refuse to treat people that way. It's wrong, regardless of my need to make a living. And so this moving up into supervisory or management roles for a lot of working class people, that has no appeal at all because of the simple immorality of it. And so you have in the United States, you have multiple millions of people who are essentially in dead-end, unstable, low-paying jobs, and they don't see any hope for getting out of that situation. They've been dealt with by an elite segment of the Democratic Party that tells them, if you want a good job, you got to go back to school and get that bachelor's degree, no matter how impractical or impossible that may be for you. That's what you've got to do. And you know what? The working class doesn't want to hear that. They're not going to be told that. They want the good paying jobs back. And there's been this trend in the last few years of people being told they can't vote this way, they must vote the other way, and then they do exactly what they're told they can't do. It happened in Greece when the left wing took over. It happened again in Great Britain with the Brexit vote. People were telling them they had to vote one way and the people voted the other way. And now it's happened in the United States. What has happened in the United States is that the working class, the people who are struggling to make a living and pay their bill, is in a cold fury. They're so mad they don't know what to do because they're having such a hard time making a living. And my personal background is not middle class. If I called it middle class, it'd have to be lower middle class, the very bottom of the middle class. But my background, the one that I grew up in, that is working class. And those are the people that I have associated with most of my life, and regardless of what's happened now, and regardless of what's happened in the future, my closest associates will be people who, though they may not be in the working class still, they are of that working class. A lot of them have worked in manufacturing and at low-wage jobs or low-salary jobs. So my background is working class, and I know the working class, and a lot of the working class has been struggling for years and years, and by the 2016 election, they were just in a cold fury because they were being told by elites in both parties, actually establishment people in both parties, that you have to adjust to globalism. Certain kinds of jobs are never coming back. If you ever want a good job, you got to go get that bachelor's degree, even though it may be out of reach for you. And if you can't do that, basically we can't help you. And people are fed up with it. The working class, those who struggle to make a living, those who struggle to pay their bills, in spite of Obamacare and in spite of proposals to raise the minimum wage and in spite of the temporary stimulus bill, they've still struggled. They're mad as hell, and they're not going to take it anymore. And that is what happened. So it wasn't shocking to me at all. I expected it. I saw polls close to the election that said most people believe the United States was on the right track. Well, that doesn't favor the party that's in control. On election day, I heard of exit polls, people saying they wanted a strong leader. My first thought was, that's not Hillary, so I think I know where this is going. And then I saw that 82% of the people who wanted change voted for Donald Trump, and I'm thinking, here we go. And so there were some internal things in these polls that were signaling what was going to happen. Now, what do I think is going to happen during the Trump administration? Well, there are a couple of ideas that could work. The renegotiating trade agreements, that could help. Infrastructure spending would help tremendously. And then there's the issue of uncontrolled immigration. It does depress wages to a certain extent. The big downfall, the big thing that would make it not work, the biggest threat to success of Donald Trump would be a return to Reaganomics, because that surely is going to fail. But I understand what happened on Tuesday. What happened on Tuesday was the working class who were struggling to make a living in spite of all that President Obama's tried to do, in spite of all that the Democratic Congress has tried to do, the people who are still struggling for income, struggling to pay their bills, they're fed up with it. They're mad as hell, and they're not going to take it anymore. And that is essentially why Donald Trump won. It wasn't some of these issues that have everybody all upset. People voted for Trump because they are struggling to make a living and struggling to pay their bills, and they have been for years. And they were looking for somebody that they believe can help them. And that wasn't the Democratic establishment, and it wasn't the Republican establishment. So the only people who were going to get elected in 2016 were either Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. Since it wasn't Sanders, it was Trump, because people are mad as hell at the establishment. The working class, who have been suffering, trying to make a living, suffering to pay their bills, they want somebody to help them. And they don't particularly care who that is, as long as it's somebody with a brand new plan, something that hasn't been tried before, to help them. And that's what happened on Election Day. And that's why I'm not surprised at all that Donald Trump won the election. I am surprised that so many other people are surprised. I still think there's a potential for a lot of bad things to happen, but I'm not particularly surprised by Donald Trump's election. And frankly, I'm a little baffled that other people are. So, that's it. That's my opinion on why I can't really understand all this shock. Maybe you understand it, I don't. Thanks and have a good day.